It's not an easy concept to understand, but it's something that God wants us to really get a hold of. Because if we want to see His power revealed, and we do, we desire it, we want to see lives transformed, we want to see people's lives healed, we want to see people out there in the world coming to know Christ. It's our passion, it's our desire. But before we can see that happen, we need to understand what it means to empty ourselves. And I want to explain why this is so necessary. Because sometimes we think we can go out there and we can see God's power manifest, and we can see people do this and this and this, and God's saying, yeah, I can do that. But I'm going to work through you. But before I can work through you, I need you to empty yourselves. I need you to become empty. Because when you become empty, then I can fill you. But while you're full of your own self, and your own self-desires, and your own self-promotion, I can't use you. I can't work through you. Because it's your pride and your ego and your need for your own self-satisfaction that's going to drive you and motivate you, and it's going to take away what I can do through you. All right, let's look to the next one. It says he humbled himself. Now, Pastor Paul said this morning, and I took on this challenge. He said this morning about movies. And I thought, Hollywood is distorting images. It sends lots of messages out there. But there are some movies where Hollywood actually got it right. Well, I don't know whether this picture was actually made in Hollywood. I know our man over here knows it was made in New Zealand, and it wasn't actually made in Hollywood at all. But The Lord of the Rings was an amazing movie. It had so many messages in it. And you can read Tolkien's story and all of that. But one of the things of giving up is that we need to give up control and power. It's the need to be in control and to have power. And in this movie, if you remember, Frodo has the ring. And he's battling to let go of it, isn't he? He's struggling to let go of the ring. Because that ring is power to him. And when he wears that ring, he gets this awesome sense of power. And we know that power begins to correct him. Every time he wears it and puts the ring on, it actually influences him and affects him. And that's what happens when we seek to have power, when we seek to be in control, when we seek to dominate other people. It has an impact on our lives. It has a negative impact. It distorts who we are. It takes us away from being what God created us to be. It brings us into something else that God hasn't intended us to be. So it's a very dangerous thing. And when Frodo drops that ring in there, and it melts while only the Gollum comes along and grabs it and all the rest of it, but actually he drops it in there, and eventually it gets burnt up in the lava and the flames. The whole power of Sauron, what I think it was, it all begins to dissipate. You see, when we let go of that need to be in control, that need of power, God's power begins to move. His Spirit begins to move. His Spirit released, because His Spirit isn't released about controlling and dominating people. It's about empowering people to fulfill His purposes. It's a whole different thing. Let's look at the next one. Empty ourselves of the desire for self-promotion, being made in His human likeness. So Jesus put aside His desire to be to be God, and took on the form of a human. Let's look at the next one. Okay, this movie. Does anyone know what this movie is? King Kong. All right, so one of the things that we need to learn and discover by emptying ourselves is this need to be vulnerable. Now, I don't know, I try to think of a movie where someone looks vulnerable. This is the only picture I can come up with. There's a little, woman in the hands of this big, huge, monstrous gorilla. Does she look vulnerable to you? I think she does. She looks very vulnerable. She looks like the gorilla could any time squash her and take it. Sorry, it's King Kong, isn't it? He could destroy her. But she's prepared to take that role and be vulnerable. What does it mean to be vulnerable? Does anyone know what it means to be vulnerable? Yes. Anyone think about what being vulnerable means? It means basically that we're prepared to put ourselves in a position where we can get hurt. Love is about getting hurt. Have you ever realized that? If you really want to love people, you've got to be willing to get hurt. You will not love someone unless you're willing to get hurt. Being hurt is part of love. When you start to love someone, you make yourself vulnerable. Because that person can reject you. That person can turn on you. That person can let you down. That person can fail you. And you get hurt. But you can say, I'm not going to love anybody. I'm not going to really risk that love, because if I risk it, I'm going to get hurt. But that's what being vulnerable is about. You see, Jesus made himself vulnerable. He made himself extremely vulnerable. When he was in heaven, he was the Son of God operating in that powerful realm. Yeah, he wasn't that vulnerable. He wasn't vulnerable at all. He was all powerful. But when he became human, he became vulnerable. He could get hurt. He was hurt. He was rejected, even by his own disciple. Judas rejected him. He was exposed to hurt. He was exposed to pain. He was exposed to emotional things that we all get exposed to. He was vulnerable. Why did he make himself vulnerable? Because he's showing us and demonstrating us the love of God. If we want to know God's love and we want to express God's love, we've got to be willing to be vulnerable. Look at the next one. Empty ourselves of the desire to hold on to others. Holding on to people. Holding on to relationships. Holding on because we need that person to meet our needs. A lot of relationships are poisonous because they're kind of sucking out of that relationship, and we're not letting go of that relationship. Let's look at this picture. Remember this movie? Do you remember what that was from? Which movie? Titanic. You love Titanic. Oh yes. Do you remember the names of the characters? Roseanne, Jack. He's Irish. He's got an Irish guy. He's talking to her, and what's he saying to her? Move over, I want to get on this thing with you. That's right, yeah. Get out of the way, because I want to be on there, and I don't want to die on this precipitate water here and freezing to death. No, he didn't say that, did he? I could practice my Irish accent. He said, let me go. Let me go. Why? So she survives. She survives because she lets him go. She doesn't want to let him go, but if she doesn't let him go, she's going to die. She's going to freeze to death as well. By releasing him, she survives. And he dies, of course. That's the sad part, isn't it? But you know, that's part of what God's saying to us. Sometimes there's things we have to let go of. There's things that we have to release. That if we hold on to them and we don't let them go, they're going to cause us to die spiritually. We're going to never fulfill what God wants for us. We're going to be held back from the purpose that God has for us. Because we're holding on. We're not letting go. Now, did Jesus let go? Was Jesus one who released? He did. He did. He constantly let go. He let go of his authority and power in heaven to become human. But he also let go of his relationships even with his disciples. When he went up to be ascended into heaven, he released his disciples to fulfill the purpose. He loved them, he cared for them, he was emotionally connected to them, but eventually he said, no, it's over to you guys, it's up to you now to do the work. I'm letting you go. I'm releasing you to fulfill your purpose. Alright, let's look at the next one. Empty ourselves of our own pride and self-centeredness, valuing others more than ourselves. It's hard to do, to value someone more than we value ourselves. This is a great movie. Let me show this movie to you. Have you ever seen this movie? Yeah. What is it? Hacksaw Ridge. It's actually a depiction of a Christian guy who decided he wasn't going to take up arms in the Second World War, and he took on the role of a medic. He refused to shoot and kill the enemy, and yet he took on the role of this medic, and he went in and he ends up saving all these soldiers who are wounded and rescues them in the face of onslaught of the enemy. He just goes in there one after another, takes them out, carries them on his shoulders, rescues them. And when I saw that movie, I said, this man represents Jesus. This is what Jesus does. This is what this man is an example of what Jesus is about. He came here to rescue us. He came here to carry us. He came to lift us out of our problems and our hardships and our difficulties. And when we're hurting and we're in pain, he carries us out. Very good. But you know, that's not just a message for Jesus, that's a message for us. Yeah. You know, if we want to reach the people of this society, the world that we're living in, we've got to carry them out. We've got to be prepared to take them on our shoulders. We've got to be prepared to bear them and the weight of them on our shoulders, because that's the love. That's what God's love is about. It's caring about others more than we care about ourselves. It's putting others before ourselves. That's not easy to do because we live in a very self-centered world. It's all about what I want, what I need. And we find it difficult to take that role of carrying other people and holding them up and saying, God, they're more important than I am. Let's look at the next one. That was a good movie. Do you like this movie? Avatar. Now, I was told by you that Avatar, you didn't like Avatar. You didn't like it. No, okay. Avatar, it's very New Age. Yeah, because it's New Age. Yeah, it's New Age. I know it's New Age. Yet, there's a very important message in there. I reckon there's a very important message in there. You might not reckon there's an important message in there. But what does this guy do? He becomes one of these Naris, or whatever they are. Navis. He becomes a Navi. He takes on the form of a Navi. When he becomes a Navi, initially goes in there to try and act to destroy this particular group of people. Well, they're not people. This kind of whatever they are. He goes in there with the idea of learning about them so that they can destroy them. But the more he learns about them, the more he identifies with them, the more he becomes one of them, even though he's human. Now, when I think about that, I know that it's kind of a long stretch. But when Jesus took on human form and he became a man and he dwelt amongst us, he began to identify with us. He identifies with our hurts. He identifies with our suffering. He does with our pain. He comes alongside us. He comes to be with us. And yes, this guy was a bit, the character was a bit out there, New Age and all the rest of it. Yet, there was something about that character, that he became one of them. He took on their problems. He took on their struggles. He took on their issues and identified with them. And that's what Jesus does when he comes as a human. Let's look at the next one. Because Jesus was willing to empty himself, he was able to identify with our suffering. That's the whole point. You see, love is about identifying with other people. It's coming alongside and understanding how they're feeling. Becoming close. Carry our pain and hurts. Because he took on human form, he could experience what we experience. He could understand what we're going through. He would relate to us. The thing that we've got to understand, that God wants us as his people to be incarnate into our society, into our world. He wants us to not be separate, or the church out there somewhere, looking down at the non-believers and the unchurched and, oh, look how holy and spiritual we are. We come to church every Sunday, we sing beautiful worship songs, we enjoy the presence of God, but, out there's people who don't know Jesus. But, that's not our concern, really. We've got much to do with being Christians. Do you know, that is not the heart of God. The heart of God is to say, hey guys, you are my people. You are me in that community. You are Jesus out there in the world. You take me to them. You become me to them. You incarnate yourself. You kenosis yourself. You get rid of all your own desires, all your own agenda, all your own things, and become me to the people around you. And when you begin to do that, my life, my who I am is revealed to them, because they see me through you. My life is exposed to them because of you. Every single one of us has this opportunity to be the image of Christ out there to the world that's lost and dying. Jesus was willing to empty himself, but because Jesus was willing to empty himself, God was lifting him up. The Father exalted him to the highest place. You see, I believe this very strongly, that God wants to lift each of us up. He wants to lift you up. He wants to lift all of us here. He wants to lift us up. He wants to raise us up into heavenly places. He wants us to experience his glory and his power. But before we can be raised up, we have to be emptied out. We have to let go. We have to be vulnerable. We have to put aside our own agendas. We have to put aside all those things that we see as really important to us and begin to say, Lord, I empty myself so that you can fill me. So that you work through me. And I don't want my own self-centeredness to stop me from fulfilling your purpose in my life. Because when we allow that to happen, God's power begins to be released. I believe God's looking for people and a church that has that kind of heart.
Yeah.
When he sees that, and when he discovers that, he says, I can trust you, Lot. I know your motives. I know your hearts are pure. I know you're emptying yourselves of your own selfishness and your own pride, and you're letting